Heads up, this episode includes mentions of self-harm, eating disorders, and domestic violence. Please listen at your discretion.
Yeah, is Lieutenant Gibbons in?
Yeah.
He is?
Yes.
Could you transfer me to Mrs. Jim McCormack, Kathie Durst's brother?
This is Kathie Durst's brother Jim talking to the police in 1982. In the months following Kathie's disappearance, the NYPD looked at Robert Durst as a suspect and basically dismissed him.
Remember, this guy is a highly regarded, in certain circles, affluent individual.
Absolutely.
I held him against his will here for 5 or 6 hours that night. And I'm not a passerby. I knew where I stood in the situation. There was no way he was going to leave here until we resolved certain situations, which we felt we did.
Not sure I agree 100% with your police work there, Lieutenant. Hi, I'm Zach Stewart-Pontier, one of the filmmakers behind HBO's The Jinx, and welcome to the second episode of the official Jinx podcast, a show where we take you behind the scenes of Andrew Jarecki's documentary series that became a real-life murder investigation. As we get ready to release Jinx Part 2, April 21st on Max, today on the show we're looking back at Chapter 2, Poor Little Rich Boy. The episode began with filmmaker Andrew Jarecki and Robert Durst sitting down for an interview.
What do you see as the downside to sitting down and doing an interview? And what do you see as the upside?
The downside of giving an interview is that the interviewer will take what I've said to make me look as bad as possible. The upside is that there will be something out there from me.
Some of what you're about to hear is a refresher from the episode, but a lot of it is never-before-heard material that wasn't included in the original show.
I understand that anybody who's paid attention to the media would have to come to the conclusion that I killed my wife, that I killed Susan Berman, that I intentionally murdered Morris Black, and it's quite possible that he's killed a whole slew of other people. That is what I would think if I was as familiar with the media as I am about me.
Robert Durst grew up in a large stone house in Westchester, just north of New York City. He was the eldest of 4 children. His parents were Seymour and Bernice Durst, and his dad ran the Durst Organization, which was and still is a massive real estate company in Manhattan. But from a young age, Bob was always much closer to his mom.
I remember from the time I was a little boy saying, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" And she'd always say, well, he's making money. And the first time I heard this, I was, 4 or 5, and I'd gotten my own little tool chest. And I sort of pictured Daddy hard at work, making the quarters and the nickels and the dimes or something like that. I don't know.
That was kind of a trope at that time, that you'd have this mercurial, brilliant dad who would run a big empire.
Andrew felt like he had an insider's knowledge into what it was like to grow up with a father who worked all day to run a big company, and he talked about it in an interview.
And then he would drive out to the suburbs on the weekend and hang out with his wife and his kids. I was interested in him in part because we had similar backgrounds.
Andrew says that both his and Bob's fathers were more focused on their work than raising children.
His father was a workaholic and didn't really care that much about the young kids. My dad was a little bit like that. My dad said in the early days, listen, I'm an intellectual, I'm a scientist, I'm a business person. You're 9. You're not that much use to me right now. And he said, by the time you get to be like figuring out who you are, you're thinking about professional life, I'm going to be really useful around then, right?
Andrew says his mother was an important presence in his childhood.
In my life, I had my mom around all the time, and my mom was incredibly supportive. And I imagine what would it have been like if I didn't have my mom? And I think Bob didn't get that.
That's because when Bob was just 7 years old, tragedy struck.
What's your first memory of that night that your mother died?
My father came and got me, and he said, I'd like you to come on over here. I want you to, see Mommy. And we looked out a hall window, out onto the roof, and there was Mommy. Okay, now go on back to bed.
Bob says that lying in bed back in his room, he heard the maid shouting, "She's off the roof."
I mean, it happened. I was there. I saw it. Whatever I saw, it never left me. I went to the funeral. I mean, if you ever have an opportunity, which you're better off not taking a 7-year-old child to a funeral, that was a disaster. People are telling me, your mommy will be safe, she'll be right here, and they're starting to lower the coffin into the ground. And I'm going, wait a minute, mommy's in this box? Oh yes, she'll be right here. Get mommy out of the box. I don't want mommy in the box. And I jumped out and tried to stop the guys from lowering this box into the ground.
The traumatic memory of his mother's death and a strained relationship with his father made it hard for Bob to fit in socially. And around this time, he was sent to a bunch of different psychiatrists.
I remember being taken by our maid, Mary, to see Dr. So-and-so. I remember my father never said a word about it. Why I was going to see these people, what was my sickness. You go to see a doctor if you're sick. And they'd start asking me questions, and after a little bit, I would clam up. Mostly the questions were about how I felt about my mother's death and how I felt about my father.
Young Bob didn't want to talk much about his strong feelings of anger toward his father, Seymour, and his younger brother, Douglas. But the psychiatrists picked up on it. Here's Bob reading a letter written by one of his childhood doctors.
Dear Dr. Jacoby, I am writing to you at the request of Mr. Seymour Durst with reference to Robert Durst. I have known Robert for the past 3 years. It was Dr. Schoenfeld's opinion that Robert's hostility toward his father and toward his younger brother, which was of such intensity that it might constitute a destructive psychodynamic force sufficient to provide a personality decomposition and possibly even, I can't read that word. Can you read that word?
I think it's probably schizophrenia.
Yes, that's it, schizophrenia.
Bob has a lot of extreme stories about his childhood, and he talks about them in this eerily detached way.
Yeah, I've gone bananas. I mean, I tried to stick a fork in my eye. I remember getting really angry at something or other and sticking a fork. I had marks here that they'd fixed with plastic surgery. I just couldn't handle frustration at that point. If something wasn't going, I would throw a total tantrum.
Do you remember any other times when you tried to hurt yourself?
I remember the marble staircase and throwing myself down it. I had keep calling it an erection set, an erector set, putting the things together, and I enjoyed doing that, but I would freak if I got to some point and couldn't follow the directions. And one of those times in the 6 months or so, or a year or so after my mother died, I just ran out of my bedroom and dove down the marble steps.
Bob grew up. He graduated from Scarsdale High School and eventually went off to college, where he developed an eating disorder.
When I was in college, I would just eat too much. And then I learned that, well, you can eat as much as you want, because you just got to throw it up. And that became a very, very familiar thing for me, to eat too much and throw it up.
Did it have a name at that time?
Whether they called it bulimia or I think they did. I do think they did.
And did you ever talk to anybody about that?
My father in later years, because my mother did that.
And so you talked to your father about it?
Yes, yes.
Did he raise it with you?
I raised it with him. I told him that I would frequently need to feel satiated and full, and I would go and eat too much and throw it up. And he right away volunteered that your mother did that all the time.
But things started to turn around for Bob when he met Kathie McCormick. Bob says they were a perfect match.
She thought I was good looking in my little way, cute or whatever it was. And she was very outgoing and social and got along with people real good. So it was perfect, because I don't get along with people. Most people don't get along with me.
Kathie McCormick had a very different upbringing than Bob. The McCormicks were a tight-knit family. They didn't have a lot of money. Here's Andrew talking to Kathie's mother, Ann.
You remember when you first heard about Bob?
Bob must have been out with his friends, and that's how she met him. Well, this pickup. Worst thing that ever happened, I think, really.
Kathie's mother was very interested in Bob Durst liking me and Bob Durst conversing with me. Her favorite reading material was the magazine Yankee, the New England thing, and she would want to talk to me about the articles in Yankee. I don't know, I'm not interested in talking about canning.
Despite not being interested in canning, after he met Kathie, the two of them moved to Vermont and opened a health food store. They called it All Good Things. Now, we covered a bunch of this in the first episode, but All Good Things was the title of Andrew's original feature film about Bob. And while they were recording the director's commentary for the DVD, Bob talked about the life he shared in Vermont with Kathie.
We were in love. I mean, in love. And we loved Vermont. This was brand new for the two of us. We were both already semi-hippies.
Bob's father, Seymour, had always put pressure on him to go into the family business. Here's a scene from the movie where Seymour takes his chauffeured limousine up to Vermont to visit the happy couple. It features Kirsten Dunst and Frank Langella.
Thanks for visiting.
Thank you, honey. I better get back to work. How you think my son could afford to live like this?
My father never leaned on me for my personal expenses. He did lean on me about, what are you going to do here with the grain and the stuff like that in 20 years? You should drop this. You move to New York and go into the business, and you're not going into the business. It's just spite. Your mother and I always intended on this and that to happen. Been building this thing up my whole life to give to you, and you just don't want anything to do with it.
Eventually, Bob gave in. He and Kathie moved back to New York, and he went to work for the Durst organization. But Bob says he did not put in any effort.
I would be in a meeting, and I would be trying to impress upon everybody, and I thought it was a complete waste of time and silly, and I would let out a big belch. No apology, no I'm sorry, no nothing. Just, keep going. I was in the business, there was nothing they could do if I did it, because what are they going to do? Fire me, which would have been all right with me. I would swear in the meetings, and I would use bad words and enjoy it when I saw a reaction.
In an interview, Andrew discussed his theory of why Bob acted out on the job.
I think to some extent, it's that Bob is just trying to make a noise for himself. And, what is Oscar Wilde says, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. And I think from Bob's standpoint, being notorious is better than not having any notoriety at all.
Did your dad ever put his foot down? Did he ever say, okay?
Yes, he put his foot down. Stop doing that. You can't keep doing that. He would take me aside into his office. You can't keep doing that. Just stop the belching. Stop talking to these people like they're the maid.
Bob's work life was a mess, and things at home were even worse.
I don't remember the first time I had slapped her or hit her.
Do you remember other times that
Oh, yeah. By 1981, our life was half arguments, fighting, slapping, pushing, wrestling.
It's chilling to hear Bob admit to this level of violence, and to watch him try to subtly blame it on his young wife.
Kathie first started changing from the Kathie I met when I made her get an abortion. I said, I told you from the beginning I didn't want children. You agreed that we wouldn't have children. Now you're telling me you're pregnant, which, you're in charge of that stuff, not me. And you want to keep the baby. Well, you keep the baby, you're going to get divorced from me. period. I just didn't want kids around. I didn't want to raise children. Somehow I thought it would be a jinx.
That you might be a jinx for them.
Yeah. I knew I wasn't going to be a good father.
I mean, we named the show The Jinx because of this moment. And a big reason for this is because, for Andrew, it shows how different Bob is from most people.
It may not weigh on Bob the way it weighs on everybody else. You know, if we could put ourselves in that situation, which is very hard to do with somebody like Bob, we could only imagine how difficult that would be to admit publicly that you had forced your wife to have an abortion.
Bob was an abusive partner, and his marriage to Kathie was falling apart. Things were in a bad spot. The whole situation boiled over January 31st, 1982. This is the last day that Kathie would be seen alive. That afternoon, Kathie goes to a party without Bob, hosted by Gilberta and Jamie, one of her best friends.
Everybody was getting along and everybody was enjoying. You know, it was just a nice evening.
Over the course of the party, Bob and Kathie have several heated phone calls.
And I can remember very clearly the telephone calls and Bobby insisting that Kathie come home and Kathie being visibly shaken after the phone calls.
Outside the house, Kathie said something that Gilberta never forgot.
We stood on the front porch and she said to me, "Gilberta, promise me if something happens, you'll check it out. I'm afraid of Bobby." And I just said, "Kathie, of course, you can count on me."
Andrew eventually asks Bob what happened that night, and Bob tells him that when Kathie got home from Gilberta's party, she was drunk and angry.
She gets back from Gilberti's, maybe 7 or whatever, angry at me, loaded, and announcing that she wants to go to the city. I said, "You can go to the city if you want, but you can't drive, and I'm not going to go to the city." And she says, "No, I'm taking the car." And I went and got the keys out of the car and told her, "No, she's not taking the car because I'm not giving her the keys." That was an argument.
Was that argument just a verbal argument?
No, that was a pushing, shoving argument.
Bob admits that he had a physical altercation with Kathie that night, but then, he says, he took her to the train station.
And so eventually she capitulated and she agreed to take the 917.
At the last minute.
A few days later, Gilberta was supposed to meet Kathie at a bar in the city.
I was waiting for Kathie and waiting for Kathie, and she never showed up.
Bob says that he was also unable to reach Kathie for the next several days, but he wasn't concerned.
She was doing a sub-intern in the hospital, which involved staying over a lot of nights, and I wasn't worried. It wasn't until I got a call from the medical school that she hadn't been in classes for several days, and I got to do something.
On Friday, 5 days after Kathie was last seen, Bob walked into the 20th precinct in Manhattan to report her missing.
My name is Michael Struck. I retired as a detective from New York City Police Department. When I initiated the missing persons brief narrative, it said the complainant, Robert Durst, was present at the 20 Precinct Detective Unit and states that his wife of 9 years, who is currently a 4th-year medical student at the Albert Einstein Medical Center, has not been seen since Sunday evening, January 31st, 1982.
Andrew asks Bob about this initial interaction with the NYPD.
Going into the police station when you...
I hated it. I didn't want to do it. The idea of talking to them and the idea of trying to convince them, because they at first didn't want to hear about it. You got any problems in the marriage? Yes. Well, don't you think she probably just took off?
Bob's actually right about this. Detective Struck did think that Kathie had probably run off and just wanted out of the marriage, and he was not particularly suspicious of Bob.
I can't really say that at that point in my initial meeting that I could detect that he was lying on anything he said to me, because his story was fairly logical as he laid it out.
But if Detective Struck followed up on one detail, it may have helped him figure out that Bob was lying.
He then returned back to the house in South Salem. As he was going to the house, he had observed his neighbor, Bill Mayer. He had a drink with Mr. Mayer.
But Bill Mayer says otherwise.
New York City police had some reason to believe that Bobby had
taken her to the train station and possibly come back here for a drink. He just, I assume, fabricated that story without ever coming here for a drink nor even discussing with us in any way.
You told Detective Struck that the Sunday night that you last saw Kathie, you had dropped her off the station and then you went to the mayor's for a drink, the neighbors.
Yeah, that's what I told the police. I was hoping that would just make everything go away. I didn't go to the mayor's. I just took her to the train station, went home, and went to sleep.
And why would that have made everything go away?
Well, then I'm at the mayor's. They wanted to hear, what did you do? So I told them I did that.
So Bob admits he was lying to the police in 1982. It's a pretty big deal. Andrew says he thinks it's a calculated move on Bob's part.
So he decided in that moment that he was going to run ahead of that fact. He knew that I probably knew that he had lied about going to the neighbors for a drink. So he had to get ahead of that by saying, and interrupting me, oh yeah, that's what I told the police, right? So you could argue that that was not a full risk on his part. He waited until I gave him half the answer. He watched me to see whether I probably already knew that that wasn't true. And that's when he said, oh yeah, by the way, that's what I told the police. That turned out not to be true.
Having a drink with the neighbors was not the only lie Bob told the police.
He further stated he then went for a walk, later called his wife from a payphone, and that had occurred at about 11:15 that evening. She stated that she was fine and that she was watching TV.
There was some discussion about that you spoke to her at some point.
Yes, that was the last part of my, the police are going to leave you alone now. I said, I called her, and I said I stopped at a payphone on the way home. She answered the phone, and that puts her in the city, and they're going to leave me alone now.
Did you end up speaking to her that night?
No.
Andrew says that Bob was still trying to think one step ahead of him.
And so that's why he ran ahead of it again. And he said, oh yeah, that's what I told them. That was part of my, now they're going to leave me alone story. Bob made a decision to tell me something that he had never told anybody before. And he made that decision because he thought that confessing to a series of lesser crimes was going to be protective, that was going to help him.
Okay, so stick with me here for a second. I want to get to another piece of Bob lying that has never been heard before, but it takes a second to explain. All the stuff that you were just listening to is all on day 2 of the interview. So that's when Bob is admitting that he had a physical altercation with Kathie. He's also admitting that he lied to the police about 2 very important things. The next day, Andrew brings up that night again, and this is what Bob says.
I don't think I had a physical altercation that night. You're sure I told you that? Because she came home, she was yelling and screaming. I don't remember pushing. I do remember going into the bedroom and locking the door and taking a pill. I don't remember any pushing and shoving, though.
This is one of those moments where I feel like Bob is actually giving us a window into the truth, even through his lie. He says that he remembers going into the bedroom, locking the door, and taking a pill. The pill is such a specific detail, I kind of think that is something that really happened. So maybe after he killed Kathie, he went into the bedroom, locked the door, and took a pill. So back in 1982, Kathie's family was watching the NYPD botch what they believed was a pretty open and shut case. Remember Jim McCormick, Kathie's brother, talking to that NYPD lieutenant at the top of the show? Well, here's a little bit more of that conversation.
With the absence of your sister, there's 2 ways of viewing this thing, at this stage, and I wouldn't bullshit you. She's either dead or she voluntarily left. So you got a 50-50 chance here if you say. I wouldn't be surprised as to the second, as a matter of fact.
Kathie's family and friends began to take matters into their own hands.
I can even recall them coming from time to time with an entourage, 3, 4, 5 girls, all really relating all these incidents of violence and threats.
But Detective Struck wasn't buying it, and Gilberta was devastated.
I really believe that some way, somehow, somebody's going to come and tell me what happened to Kathie. And if I don't get that, I'll sit there as an old woman wondering what I did wrong and how I let my friend down, because I need to know. I need to know what happened to Kathie.
And that's where we left things in Chapter 2. But there was an amazing interview that we weren't able to fit into the original episode. It's with a woman named Flo Jones, who was Bob Durst's secretary at the Durst organization in the late 70s and early 80s. She saw firsthand Bob's relationship with his father. She got to know Kathie, and the conversation she had with Andrew about all this. It's really powerful, and it opens another window into how Bob works. Here it is.
When did you first start working at the Durst organization? How did that, just tell me the story of how that came to pass.
I met directly with Robert Durst. It was very regular. I told him what I was there for. And I told him I wasn't leaving because I came for a job and that's what I was gonna get, and I got it. Very simple. And I, for one, I'm not afraid of anybody to work for. You know, just tell me I can't do it and I'll prove you wrong because I can do it.
So you didn't like to take no for an answer?
Andrew says, so you didn't take no for an answer.
Oh no, no. I'm more than Flo. I'm Miss Jones, Miss Flo Jones.
Miss Flo Jones began to work as Bob's secretary, and pretty quickly she recognized that his heart wasn't in it.
Bob was doing the job not for Bob, but for the company.
Did he get stoned? Did he smoke pot at that time?
I mean, it would take a rocket scientist to recognize what he wanted to do. If he say he wanted to do something, he would just do it. One or two of his friends would come up in the office, and I would present them in the office, and they would go in and close the door. But as far as what they did, I never saw what they did.
See, she's not going to narc on Bob. Anyway, Flo says she was one of the few people who could keep Bob in check.
At times, his voice would go up, and he would yell, wait a minute, I would say to him, Bob, who do you think you're talking to? I'm not your other secretary, I'm your secretary now. You don't talk to me that way.
So you were firm with him?
Oh yes, he was firm with me too. Believe me, he was a very firm boss. Yeah, he could scream. He could really scream.
In contrast to Bob's short fuse, Flo remembers the warmth she felt when she first met his wife, Kathie.
I'm like, wow, she's pretty. She's the kind of person that you could feel. And you know, once the hello came back to you, you could feel that, wow, she's a real nice person.
Over time, Flo and Kathie became friends.
And sometimes she would call in the office and she said, is he in? I said, no, but I think he's coming. No, I don't want him to know I'm calling. I said, okay, I won't tell. There were a few times where he almost caught me talking to her. And I would say, listen, Kathie, he's coming and I'm gonna change your name. I'm gonna call you Rosalind, which is my sister's name. And I would say, okay, Roz, so listen, why don't I talk to you another time? That would cut our conversation short. That would let her know that he's in and he can hear what I'm talking about.
So you guys had that as kind of a secret?
Andrew asks, so you guys had this as kind of a secret?
It was a secret. Believe me, it was a secret.
Kathie trusted Flo enough to tell her she was afraid of Bob.
One time, they went to this affair. I remember she was telling me he grabbed her hair and took her out of wherever they were. I'm like, oh my God. I said, well then why don't you leave? She said, oh no. Just leave him. The way he carried on, he was something else.
In what way?
He needed a sister like me. Really could tangle with him. But Kathie wasn't that kind of person. She was like a soft-like person.
And then one day, Bob came into the office and told Flo that Kathie was missing.
When he came in that morning and said, Kathie is missing. What, missing? Missing where? what the hell is he talking about? She's missing. Have you talked to her? Talk to her when? No, wait a minute. She's missing. And when he said that she was missing, I thought she had left him. Oh, wow, she must have left. But then kind of got a little tight there. It wasn't she just left.
Not long after that, Kathie's brother Jim McCormick spoke with Flo on the phone about what might have happened to his younger sister. And he recorded that conversation too.
Do you think she's out there hiding? And
I think so.
Why would you think that, though?
I don't know. The way she would be so careful as to what she wanted to say on the phone, you know.
Yeah.
It was always, are you sure nobody's listening? Say, no, nobody's listening. You know. Well, what do you think?
I don't know right now.
Jim told Flo that he feared the worst, and he didn't know what to think about Bob.
What about him?
Yeah, he loved her. I mean,
Right.
he said he did.
Well, everybody knew that there was something about a divorce or something.
That was already going around the office.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything. Then the next thing, everybody's asking me questions. You know, like, are they getting back together? I said, I don't know. Don't ask me, please. Ask them.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything. I just want somebody to tell me something.
At this time in 1982, Flo tried to stay out of the way as much as possible. But when she was questioned by the police, she did tell them about Kathie's domestic abuse allegations.
You told the police that Kathie called you like a month before she disappeared, and she told you that Bob had beaten her up?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
In the apartment on 86th Street. He had beaten her up. That was it.
She called you to tell you that?
Mm-hmm.
Why did she tell you?
Not to be smart, but she wanted me to know. I have to say it like that. Why did she want me to know? She didn't have nobody else to tell. And the reason I know that is because she told me that she didn't have nobody else to talk to. And then she was glad that I was there. Kathie trusted me. I could not spoil the trust. And he knew, by some way, form or whatever, he knew that we had been talking. And she had been telling me a lot of things about him. But I would not say anything about what she would say to me. It wasn't my business. I wasn't going to let it be my business to tell him.
Bob seemed to suspect that he couldn't trust Flo, so he fired her.
He says, I'm going to have to let you go or something to that effect. And I assumed it was because of the fact that Kathie was missing.
But don't you think he would need an assistant even more now? He's going to be looking.
Yeah, but he needed an assistant that didn't know as much as I did.
Next time on the official Jinx podcast, it's Chapter 3, The Gangster's Daughter. This is the episode where we meet Susan Berman.
The one thing about Susan, she's never boring. But Susan was dangerous.
You never knew what was going to come out of her mouth because facts almost didn't always have anything to do with what Susan was saying.
And we'll hear the story of Bob lurking outside Gilberta's house.
And I looked at him straight in the eye and I said, you motherfucker, this is my neighborhood.
That's all next time on the official Jinx podcast. The official Jinx podcast is hosted by me, Zach Stewart Pontier. It's produced by ZSP Media and Hit the Ground Running Films with HBO. Watch episodes of The Jinx and stream The Jinx Part 2 starting April 21st on Max. This episode was produced by Ethan Oberman. The rest of our team is Laura Newcomb, Naomi Bronner, and Ramoy Phillip. The supervising producer is Liz Stiles. This episode was edited by Simone Polanin. Mixing and engineering by Robin Shore. It was recorded at Relic Room in New York City. Music by Wes David Thorson. Additional music courtesy of HBO. The executive producers are Andrew Jarecki and me, Zach Stewart Pontier. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstadt, Ali Cohen, Aaron Kelly, and Savon Slater at HBO Podcasts. And the fabulous Jinx team. Sam Neve, Kyle Martin, Susan Lazarus, Annabelle White, Pedro Vital, Jesse Herman, Michele Zabarfian, Nako Narder, Charlotte Kaufman, and Richard Henkin. And thanks to Ro Dillon, George Vogel, Charlie Wessler, Nancy Jarecki, and Emily Wiedemann. And thank you for listening and getting through that long list of credits. As a reward, here's Bob with Andrew at the end of the interview, sharing a little moment together.
You've led a fascinating life. It's actually very engaging.
I hear that. Everybody who wants to interview me tell me I've had a fascinating life.
Well, it is a fascinating life, but for me especially. Yeah, I think you should keep rolling while we're leaving, just because it's a nice
Oh, you
goodbye.
can roll while I leave, as long as I hear the word leave. Bye.